My name is Sri Peruvemba. I'm Chair of Marketing for SID. And this is the first time ever that we are doing a forum like this. This is called the CEO Forum. And our intent is to learn the lessons that these CEOs have experienced and share some of their experience. And you will have opportunity to ask questions as well. The first CEO that I wish to introduce you is Frank Christiaens. Frank is the CEO of CLEARink, and he has had a lot of very interesting experiences in his career. He started his first startup, I believe, in 1991, and he has degrees from Belgium, from the Imperial College in London, and he is a chairperson for other startup companies. He's an investor. He's got a lot of very interesting background. And one of the reasons we picked Frank was he worked as head of a fairly large company, several $100 million in revenue in China that he built by himself. Welcome, Frank. Dr. Helge Seetzen is the president of SID. He is also an entrepreneur. He started companies that were in the display industry, very successful, sold to Dolby. He now manages a portfolio of well over 20 companies. Every time one of us think we are busy, he's on the board of like 15 or 16 of them and manages all of these companies, does a great job. He's the incoming president of SID. Welcome, Helge. Paul Travers has traveled all the way from New York. He's the CEO of Vuzix. When we talk about AR, VR products, his company is actually shipping products, and he's CEO of a public company in the US. So a lot of my questions, he's going to probably say no comment. So we're going to stick to very personal type of experiences and so on. Welcome, Paul. Ross Young is CEO of DSCC, a company he founded recently. Ross has been in the industry for a long time. Many of you know him. He's founded many companies and successfully sold companies, and he's been an entrepreneur for a very long time. And in his day job, he actually looks at different parts of the industry, and both from a geographic perspective as well as market trends. It's one of the very hard things to do. So welcome, Ross. For those of you that have been in any session that I have moderated, there is a routine that we do. I know that in the front row, Naila is saying, oh my God, if I had known that, I would have come 5 minutes late. But being that it is in the afternoon, and at least for those of you that had lunch, I had lunch, and the blood is all here, right? Let's get some oxygen in you, and then we'll get started. With everybody's permission, I'd like everyone that is able, if you have, if your feet is hurting, if you're ill, you don't have to do this. This is optional. Would you all kindly please stand up? Panel 2, please. And you thought you were exempt, huh? So here's what we're going to do, okay? This is not a technical session, right? This is a business session. So we do things differently here. Okay, just follow my lead. I'm going to put this a microphone down, after which I just have to use my loud voice, okay? So what we're going to do is I'm going to put my hands up in the air, and we're going to jump up and down. I'm not going to do 30 times. This time we'll just do 20, okay? All right, here you go. Hands up in the air. Okay, we're going to go, follow my lead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Come on, guys, you could have done it higher. All right.
Some guy just walked in and walked right out again.
No, this is a scientific fact. If you have oxygen in your system, the way you interact with other people, the way you absorb information, particularly if you're slightly out of breath like I am now, is a fun thing, okay? All right, very good. With that, I'm going to request each of the CEO panelists to expand on the introduction a little bit, keep it to about a minute or so, kind of tell us how you got to where you are, right? We'll start with you, Ross.
Okay. I became CEO of Display Search because my previous job, the company was going out of business. So I needed a job. I wanted to stay where I lived. I wanted to stay in the display industry. Felt like I could add value, so I started a company called Display Search while I was working at another company called Owl Displays. I came to SID. I produced like 500 newsletters, put them outside one of the main conference rooms. People started grabbing them, subscribing to my reports, and the company was born. So I would say that SID changes lives. And actually, 20 years later, that's how I formed Display Supply Chain Consultants. I networked with some people that I used to know, and we decided, hey, let's get into business together. So, I mean, I think networking events like SID, where you have 7,000 people gathering, you can really produce a lot of amazing things. So I started Display Search. I hired the best people I could find, incentivized them the best way I could, and the company really grew. I sold the company 10 years later. I left the company 2 years after that. I joined Samsung because I wanted to get back into the display industry, and quickly left Samsung because I wanted to have some authority and I wanted to be involved in the decision making, and then did some fun different things, got into solar market research, started to try to get healthy because I worked way too much when I was running my business, and I gained, I think, 70 pounds from college to when I sold my business, and then decided to do Ironman triathlons. And I took 4 years off and just raced and did triathlons, and qualified for Kona, which is the hardest thing to do in the sport. Did that race, got injured, couldn't really train anymore, decided to get back into the space, and that's where I'm at now.
Very good. Thank you. Paul?
Okay, so first I got to say, it's no wonder he wasn't breathing heavy through all that. Ross, I didn't know you were a marathon man. Good for you. Let's see here. I used to work at Eastman Kodak. This is back when in Rochester, New York, they had 75,000 employees just in Rochester, New York. They probably had one of the largest R&D budgets of any company on the planet. You could kind of look at them like the Google of the day. And it was so interesting after 5 years of making some of the coolest multi-megapixel digital camera things, and not a single one of them would they bring to market because they were afraid to hurt film. And so it was kind of a big disappointment. So I decided to leave, and I had 3 kids and started a business in a basement of my house, making sound cards for the PC. I built and sold that business ultimately to Advanced Micro Devices. They put it on motherboards, put the silicon in their processor chips, et cetera. That was a 3-year period of time. Then I started a company making universal serial bus connectivity products and sold it to Belkin in maybe 2.5, 3 years. And then I started a virtual reality head-mounted display company. And if any of you follow that industry at all, it has been the rockiest road ever. And I gotta say, you get to thinking this stuff is easy, you build and sell 2 companies in 4 or 5 years, and then you do something like that, and it's humbling. So here we are today now. We have 85 employees. We're in Rochester, New York, still. We're making the coolest optics on the planet. The smartphone is completely changing the concept of augmented reality. People are getting tuned to the whole idea of doing this stuff, and what's missing now, finally, is the smart glasses, and that's what Vuzix is doing today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Helge?
My path to where I'm at today is very much interwoven with my path in SID, and since I'm here, so it was sort of a dual head, my day job as a CEO and my I don't know what it is, my night job as SID president. I'll maybe conjoin the 2 things. So I really stumbled into entrepreneurship through an accidental trajectory. So started out as an undergrad working on some early display technology, and then really got sucked into starting a startup around this, mainly because we needed money. I very much distinctly remember this. We had a lot of grant money for research, and then we wanted to go to this trade show called SID to show our stuff. And back then there was no iZone, so the booth cost a bit of money, and we couldn't use any of the grant money for exhibits, and so we quite literally started the company. I remember this, writing a $5,000 check as the seed financing. Myself and the two co-founders wrote each $5K, so we had a little bit of money to go to the trade show. And so miraculously that company grew a bit, and we eventually grew quite a bit, and we were able to then sell it to Dolby Labs. And at that point I had firmly embedded the belief that I wanted to do entrepreneurship for my whole life. This is exciting, it's fun, it combined my passion as a technologist with the ability to interact with people, to build teams, to grow something, to leave a bit of a mark in the world. And I've basically been doing this ever since. So this early stage of ideation, team formation, early traction, revenue generation, this early exciting time of the first sort of 2 years of a venture is what I do over and over now. So I run an outfit now that takes interesting technologies from universities, assembles teams around them, and then helps those teams grow to become full companies. We then also finance those companies and help them grow over time. And it's a wonderful job. In parallel to this, as I mentioned, I've sort of lived through my SID career over, 14 years, going through just about every role that the society has to offer. And I can only encourage all of you, speaking somewhat selfishly as the president now, consider volunteering for SID. It was mentioned here earlier how much networking opportunity there is, and there definitely is a lot of opportunity if you just wander the floor and meet people, but volunteering gets you constant exposure to some of the most involved, most active and senior guys in the society. And for me, certainly, that was career building. I was a program chair while I was still in my grad school. After selling the first company, I went and got a PhD. I was a general chair, I was a publication chair, I was even marketing chair at some point, though a much, much more pathetic one than Sri, who's a master of this. They picked me because that guy knows business, and that was like the high watermark for at that time. And then obviously held pretty much all the other executive roles that you can hold, treasurer, secretary, and so forth. So I would encourage you to volunteer for the society and get really the most out of it. There's a lot to be taken here if you just give a little bit and show up.
Thanks, Helge. Frank, please expand on your background and introduction.
Yes, I will. So I'm the CEO of CLEARink Displays, and I've been in display industry since 1990, when I graduated as an electrical engineer and started my first company. Still while studying. That was a software advertising company that I started then. I moved to Asia in the mid-1990s, and I went to China in 1996. I started a telecom operator in 1999 in Hong Kong, Australia, and Singapore. And I got completely smacked by the telecom crisis in 2001, when WorldCom went belly up, and I had to try and survive and scale down my company to find a rescue angel. Today, I run CLEARink Displays, but I also advise or am a director with a number of other companies. I sit on the board of a Beijing-based software company that I listed in Hong Kong. I advise an artificial intelligence company in Vancouver. I advise a VR company in Vancouver. I am the chairman of a wireless charging startup. So I try to use my experience and help as many colleague CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs to make it through this challenging process, I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And also, I recall last year, both Helge and Frank were here when we did the first ever Women in Technology Forum, trying to support the organization. So the theme for today is to listen to some of the lessons they learned as they climbed that ladder and became CEOs. So we'll start with you, Ross, to think of an event where you were successful as a CEO, and what was the lesson that you learned that you can share with all of us?
I think a recurring lesson that I've learned is importance of being focused. In market research, barriers to entry are low. It's easy to write a report on anything, but companies who go after many different technologies, are the expert of none. So we would be very, very focused, and rather than covering all aspects of the display market, we would cover the whole supply chain for a single technology. So at the beginning of the middle of the 90s when I started, we didn't know if we should be covering FEDs or EL or all these different technologies, and we said, well, let's follow the money. Where's the money going? We followed TFT LCDs at the time where they were still just evolving, they're just starting, and thank you. And so being very focused and is very critical. Companies who go after have too many products, go after too many technologies at in the beginning of their early stages is always a recipe for failure, usually. And even now, I'm competing against my old company. They're 4 or 5 times bigger, and we've had a lot of success by just being very narrowly focused on the OLED supply chain. That seems to be a great place to play, and we're not going after every market, and we've had a lot of success. So I think that's a recurring theme.
Oh, it's wonderful, and your experiences directly relate to this industry, and which is really wonderful. Thank you. Paul, you run a publicly traded company, and I know the challenges in a public company. Please cite some success that you had and what lesson you specifically learned from it.
I don't want to go too far into the public side, not because of your comments earlier. In my career, I've had several quick successes, and as a young guy, I really do think that I got to feeling pretty much like this stuff was easy to do. And if you think about it, to sell 2 companies in 5 or 6 years, and then to be at this one thing since 1993, it requires significant perseverance. Some would say we probably should have pivoted into, I don't know, making direct view displays or something, but there's always been a belief in the fact that this technology would change the world. And so if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to get started, I think you got to face up to the fact that it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of perseverance to get there. I think it's a staple. There's probably every single one of these guys up here, one of the things you're hearing is they work hard. They put in a lot of hours. They get a vision and a focus, and they stick with it. And then I think the other piece that was important is to know the customer that you're trying to build for. In the first 2 businesses that I built, it was so clear. We were making sound cards for the PC, for the gaming industry. It was well defined. It was easy to tackle the space because we knew exactly what we were going for. And the same thing with the Universal Serial Bus products. We knew that USB was brand new interface. There were all these accessories and devices that were going to work on it, and we built expertise around that. So they were well defined. And then when we got into the VR space, as much as it was such a cool idea and everything, there really were no use cases. Everybody was trying to, it's the hammer and the nail thing. And so, getting through that, understanding that, the more you can define and know what the customers and know that you're going to bring value to them, I think the better the chances of success the company will have. And in fact, that's probably the biggest out of all of that, have perseverance, but persevere on the things that in the end, you're going to make something that will bring value to folks.
Thank you so much. Helge, you've built company yourself, started, sold it, had a huge success, and also now you've had exits with your portfolio companies. Please cite some example and what specifically you learned.
Yeah, I learned so much. But the overarching lesson is that companies and success in general is built by people. People, leaders, teams, founders, executives, whatever they are, people build companies, and therein lies much of the pleasure of building a company, is that you get to work with awesome people, but also a lot of the challenges. And I'm not just referring to kind of the basic managerial challenges of managing people. All of us manage organizations. We have people that don't work out that have to be fired and people that have to be hired and so forth. So that's the management layer. That's normal. There's nothing special in entrepreneurship about that. You have the same problem if you're running a large group at Samsung or something. What's special about entrepreneurship is actually what you just said, which is passion and hard work is table stakes. If you don't have that, you won't get out of the starting blocks. But passion is a double-edged sword. So when these days, when I invest in leaders and founders that I'm helping to build their own companies, one of the first things I tell them at the very beginning is that there will be a time when they will love me, and there will be a time when they will hate me, and they will do both with passion. And then hopefully the hate converts into love again at some point and sort of goes up and down. But that one was a tricky thing for me to wrap my head around, that if you are, whether you're a founder or an executive or an investor, your startup or your multiple startups, in my case, my portfolio, will have a few people that are really passionate believers. If you don't have those, then you're screwed. You won't get won't get going. But if you have them, that creates very different people dynamics than sort of a regular employee thing where the people show up at 9 to 5 and the impact of your motivational management is to get them to stay until 6 or something like that, or put in a little bit of extra effort. Because when those passions are in sync and aligned, you can achieve incredible things. But inevitably, they will also come desynchronized once in a while, and opinions will diverge and viewpoints will change, or just the way you want to do stuff differs. And then those are the moments of crisis. And I'm still having done this a couple dozen times now, I'm still learning how to minimize the divergent periods and maximize the converged period. And so that's probably the biggest challenge I live with on a daily basis.
Thank you so much. Frank, same question.
Yes, same question. I believe that if you listen, that you always keep learning in a working environment. Of course, privately as well, but it's important that you always keep learning. I also believe that it's wise never to believe people who claim to be experts. I never believe anybody who knows it all. I always question. Everything I will question. I think that's something I learned through damages sustained, My second rule is that if you want to build a company, only the best people are good enough. There is no such thing as a compromise in hiring. That's why I work with the people that I work with. And the third thing that I learned, painfully as well, is that you have to be on the lookout for events that you cannot control. No matter how good you are, I almost went bankrupt in the telecom crisis. I had another company that I lost in the dot-com bubble. And in the 2008 financial crisis, I had a tough time too. So you gotta be as good as you can be with the best possible people, and still stuff will happen. And as a CEO, you need to be on the lookout so you can very quickly change gears, change direction, and aim for survival.
These are pretty profound lessons. You get a big list of them when you read a book or you watch a video or talk to some expert, but nothing like hearing each of you sort them out and say, these specific things happen to us, and this is kind of how we've experienced this. What I'm going to do is, usually in a forum like this, we wait until the end to ask for Q&A, and we never have time. So today what I'll do is see if we can pause for a moment and see if we can take one or maybe maximum 2 questions, and then we'll come back to the forum. I believe there is a microphone available, or you can borrow. Yeah, there's a microphone available if somebody's got questions. And for those of you that know me well, I have this another bad habit, which is I'll point at people I think that have a question and are not asking it. So before I do that, you may want to volunteer. Okay. I thought Bruce is breaking tradition by saying, I'm going to ask the first question.
I wouldn't do that.
Well, I would love for you to do that and throw the panel off a little bit. There's one from Suptik.
This is
So
a question to Dr. Paul Travers.
Introduce yourself and then ask the question.
I am in Iskwin right now and working from Kent State and did my PhD from Kent State University Liquid Crystal Institute. My question to Dr. Paul Travers is, what is the vision you see in the display industry right now? Is it from the large display, high definition display to more personalized VR interactive? Is that the trend and direction for the future?
We're not about this immersive sort of gaming kind of environment thing. We're more about connecting the digital world to the real world. And we've been doing this since '93, as you guys have a feel for it. So that's many, many years. And for years, we have been making these big, crazy, bulky things. And the one thing I've learned through all of that is, if people won't wear it, you've already failed. So number one for us is making glasses and wearable devices that are lightweight, comfortable, all-day usable, and don't make you look like a box of rocks. Number two, there's an amazing thing that's coming in the world today. People are holding up their phones like this. They're looking through the back of their phone and they're pointing the camera at the real world, and it's being filled with all this digital information, creating amazing experiences. Just at Google I/O, the guy holds his phone. He's doing the mapping stuff out on the street. He's trying to figure out how to get it lined with the road. He holds the phone up like this and he looks, and there's an arrow painted on the street telling him which way to go to get to where he's going. Those experiences are completely changing the way people use their phones. It used to be you'd type a number in and you'd say hello, then you could cruise the web, and today the paradigm is turning into hold it up, look through it, and connect digital to the real world. That's where Vuzix plays. We're making glasses, optical see-through systems, so you put them on and it's just like using a regular pair of glasses. However, all that information that heretofore you had to hold your phone up is going to just come into your glasses and paint the world in front of you. So there's a shift happening. There's hundreds of millions of phones that can do that, and that's where the focus for Vuzix is, augmenting the real world with the digital world, not about putting your head in a bucket and being in the VR space.
Thank you so much. Is there a second question? Wow, there are 3 second questions. I'll only take one, please.
Hi. Hi there. So being a CEO on technology space is quite challenging, especially after all these years that some of you have done this for several years. I think a question is, how do you maintain the passion? It's probably one of the hardest things, is how, because everything is changing so much, the company, the market, everything needs to be, how do you maintain that fire? Thank you.
I think it's in the DNA.
Yeah.
It just doesn't go away from me.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to this, and so there's a lot of debate whether entrepreneurs are born or made, or whether you can train them. If you're in the world of venture capital, that's something that you spend a fair bit of thought about, of what how do you recognize good entrepreneurs. And my experience has been that, one, there's certainly an element that you're born with. There's certainly a flame of wanting to do something. But the other part is you have to hate failing. Not in the sense that, when you fail, which you inevitably will, because we all get hit with something, that you kind of go into a cycle of despair and totally become inactive and depressed and so forth. That's not particularly helpful. That might be a horrible condition, but it's not helpful. But you have to hate the notion of failure. So whenever failure comes close, which it will do pretty much every day, it certainly does for me, like not a week goes by when something doesn't go wrong, you have to just, out of pure stubbornness and unwillingness to accept the bad result, just power through it, fix stuff, pivot, do whatever it takes, right? And to me, at least, this comes almost entirely out of an obsession with not failing, rather than an obsession to achieve. I don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to change the world. I happen to have done a few things that had some impact on the world, far from changing it, but certainly done a little bit. But that, for me at least, is not the driving motivation. The driving motivation really is, I've offered these people a job, I built this business, I took these people's money, I promised these guys a product that we would ship, I promised these guys some IP that we would commercialize, and I would hate to call them up and tell them that we screwed it up. So let's just do one more thing, one more hit on the ball, and see how far we can get it down the field.
I'd like to take this question to the other two panelists as well. Frank, same question. What keeps you going, right? What keeps this passion up?
It's a very good question. So I recognize the refusal to fail, but I also like to kick the boundaries. I'd like to find really difficult problems that I'd like it when people call me crazy and say, you can never do this. And yeah, and I'd like to kick the establishment. Like one thing I did in '96, I introduced DSL technology to the telecom world. I went to people and I said, you know what, you're dialing up, reading email at 64 kilobit per second. I'll give you 2 megabit. I'll give you 8 megabit, right? That was like wiping out the whole industry and coming with something new, something disruptive. That's what keeps me going.
That's what keeps you going.
Right.
It's wonderful. Ross, same question.
I think what keeps me excited about being a consultant in the display industry is we're solving problems for people. People come to us with a problem that they can't solve on their own, and they're asking us to figure it out for them. So that's a bit of a thrill for us. And we're not just helping the same type of company over and over and over again. We target the whole supply chain. So what we talk to equipment companies and materials companies, the panel makers, the companies that are buying panels, and the companies that are investing in the supply chain, the hedge funds. So they all come to us with their problems, and we try to solve them for them. So when we feel like we've done a good job, you get a bit of a thrill from it. And when you land an order because you're better than your competition, that's always a thrill as well. So I think when I pretty much took 4 years off, and what I missed was winning. You know, I wasn't going to win any Ironmans, but when you win an order or you solve somebody's problem, you feel like, you know, you won, and I think you miss that in your life if you're retired. You don't win anymore.
If I can just maybe give you one example, since that relates very much to SID, that what Frank just said is very much true, trying to push the boundaries. That example sustained me for, you know, the first 5 years of my career. In 2003, I came to my first display week, and we were, with that seed money that we had scraped together to be here, and we were showing the, I was publishing a paper, just a normal kind of paper in the symposium, about this idea we had. And I vividly remember this to this day. I walk up, I give my talk, and you know, the idea we had is we took, you know, you take an LCD, and then we said, well, the LCDs have fairly limited contrast, so we're going to put some LEDs behind it, and we're going to control those LEDs, and that will give us very high contrast. And that at the time, just nobody was doing that. Nobody did that. And I remember giving my talk, and afterwards, first question, some gentleman stands up and says, I am so-and-so vice president of Sony, which at the time was still a very, very dominant display maker, and had done actually some work in the LED space. And he goes, you know, this is a very nice theory, but you understand that, one, the human eye can't possibly see more than a 200-to-1 contrast, and two, this whole LED thing is just never going to happen. It's way too expensive. It's totally impossible. Your stuff won't work. And here was, my literally first introduction to the display community. This establishment person of total authority, just basically, looks at my stuff and goes, "Kid, you're dumb. This is stupid. This can't work." And for many years, I woke up in the morning going, "Screw you. We're going to figure out a way to make this work. We're going to figure out a way to make the technology work, to get the price points down, and so forth and so forth." And 15 years later, this whole show floor is full of HDR display that certainly have more than 200-to-1 contrast, and LED TV has become the dominant display technology, only now being sort of slowly attacked by OLED. So it's clearly possible. But that that desire to, it's this mixture of bucking the establishment and not admitting failure. Because I could have slunk away, right? That's the part that's in the DNA. I could have listened to that, going like, oh my God, this guy, he must be right. I'm missing something. I'm just going to go in my corner and cry and, apply for a job at Sony, right?
No, I don't think any of you will slink away. Dr. Paul Apin, who's here in the audience, we was in one of our previous panels. He and I worked for a company where when we started, people were saying, what you're making is science fiction, it won't happen. And we were part of a management team that took it to over $1 billion in revenue. So these things can happen. It's very hard, but it's still possible. Just to warn you, there is a question that we never discussed that I'm going to ask you towards the end. That's all the warning I'm going to give you. Let's talk about failures. I know Frank already talked about some failures. Some of you, Helge also mentioned about failures. But I'm going to start with Paul. Paul, you worked for a company that at that time was the Google, right? No longer is. And you can either use that example, if it's appropriate, or whatever example you want, of something of a profound failure from which you personally learned something, and please share that with the audience.
Well, I have a couple of them, actually. The Eastman Kodak one is a great one. It was an amazing company. They were doing so many things right. They had multiple multi-billion-dollar companies they built, and they sold them all in an effort to save film. And I learned over the years watching them go downhill to bankruptcy. It was such a cool thing, actually, when the market cap of my company beat Eastman Kodak's. I was like, holy smokes. When I left, there was a lot of people that said, are you out of your mind? You're leaving the mothership. In any event, if somebody's going to eat your lunch, you're better off doing it yourself than letting the guy next to you do it. And Kodak they didn't get that, it seems to me. Look, they had a hard problem to solve. It was $5 for a roll of film, $13 to get it processed, and everybody did that for 25 pictures, and half of them looked like crap when they came out, and they just kept coming back for more. And today, they're all free, right? I mean, every single one of us has 20-plus megapixel cameras on their phones, and so that's a hard one for them to have fought through. But the bottom line is, to me, and this is why Vuzix is here today still, we have been innovating and changing and pushing the envelope to make sure that it's not the other guy that figures out how to do this, it's Vuzix that comes out the winner. So I think that was a great lesson that Eastman Kodak taught me, and I think a lot of people can see that just in life. The other one was, again, it comes down to this whole understanding the customer and dealing with adversity. The first VR company that I made, it was first quarter, we sold $6 million worth of product. It was as cool as the Oculus Rift was when it came out. We were the talk of everywhere. And in the end, 3 to 4 years later, the company went bankrupt. And it was an incredibly painful period to go through. And I found that when I finally decided to deal with it, address it, and move forward, my life got better. So it's not good to sit in the cesspool. If you have issues, you should, as soon as you can, address them and move forward, because it's painful when you're in those spots, and you're better off at fixing them and moving them on as quick as possible.
No, absolutely. Ross, you had, I won't call failures, but setbacks when you were in the Ironman races, as well as when you were building companies. I'm sure you've fallen a few times off your bicycle, got up on the bicycle, and still, got to the finish line. What can you share with us?
I think my biggest shortcoming probably is I believe too much in the good of everybody and my ability to mold people to do things that I think they could probably do that they can't. So I've had friends that I've hired in when I was at Display Search and at my new company who I know are good people and are competent, but they're not cut out for the job that I thought they could do. I believe that, hey, if I could do it, they could do it. It's not that big of a deal, but they can't do it. And having to end that relationship is very painful. And that's been a struggle. And people are hard to manage. I don't have a background in managing a lot of people. I was a good analyst and I decided to run a company, it didn't mean that I could manage 30, 40 people, and there are a lot of issues with that, that if you don't have that experience, you can make a lot of mistakes.
Do you now surround yourself with people that have that strength?
Well, I have not worked in a lot of big companies, so I probably don't know too many people with those strengths, but that's one of the reasons why I like very small businesses.
Sure, sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
See, that's a key thing, right? You recognize this and you're able to, say that, this is for me and that is not for me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other reasons I wanted to start my own company is I had worked in 2 companies that went public and 2 companies that failed, and I didn't think there was that much of a difference between them, and I wanted to have a greater control of my destiny, and in a small little consulting company, you can certainly do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Frank, you talked about failures, right, earlier in the telecom and others. Talk about some experience and what have you done different since that failure? You need this, Frank.
Yes, I need the microphone. I've been making quite a few failures by being too busy. It's easy to be busy. It's easy to come to sit, and I'm doing it again this week. I start meetings at 7:30 in the morning, and by midnight I'm still in the bar discussing business, right? So that's actually not very good. Because I know from experience that I've missed on some great opportunities because I didn't make the time to evaluate them. So I promise hereby next year at SID, I'm not going to book my schedule full. Okay, so that's the first thing. Most of my operational mistakes have been hiring mistakes and keeping the wrong persons for too long, because I have this weakness that I start caring about people, and that's meant to be cynical. I try to do better hiring now, so I don't have to deal with the pain of firing. I interview 5 to 10 people every week, so I always have a pipeline of great people. So I will be interviewing you, and even if I don't know where I'm going to put you, but if you're an awesome person, then I want to stay close and use you when time is there. I also want to learn to terminate faster. There's always pain, so you may as well bite the bullet. And then my biggest failure is that I don't spend enough time with my family. Tomorrow is my son's birthday, and for some reason my wife decided to give birth during display week. And for the last 5 years, I've been missing my son's birthday, and that's kind of troubling. That's probably not something else that I need to change. So promise again, next week I will leave on Wednesday nights. Okay.
So, when the next forum is the Women in Technology Forum, and invariably every year the question gets asked, how do you balance work and life? And I never understand why don't they ask the same question in an all-male forum. By the way, the first CEO that I contacted was a female CEO. Unfortunately, she could not make it. And this is something, and Helge feels very strongly about the subject as well. It just will not happen if we just passively expect that more women will join the executive ranks or be on forums and take leadership roles. We have to do something positive about it. Helge, your turn. Talk about, you work with a lot of startup companies. I'm sure you had your share of failures.
Yeah, so I've been in the fortunate position that I haven't reached the point yet where an entire business has failed. Somehow always managed to muddle our ways through, but I failed, I have failed and continue to fail all the time in actually the categories that Frank just mentioned, which is on the people side. That is by far the hardest thing. My CFO, who is my investment partner in the fund that I currently run, keeps accusing me that I fall in love too quickly, and it's a bit like you. When I meet people, there's an immediate sense of optimism of, wow, this is an incredible person. I could do wonderful things, and yeah, there's some shortcomings, but we can, there's the hubris of saying, oh, we can, I could fix that and mold them that way and shape them this way, and it never quite works, right? I do believe I've had maybe a little bit of a positive impact on some people over the years, but you never quite, get somebody to mold into the dream, because the dream is a hypothetical thing, right? And we live in the real world where everybody, myself most definitely included, has flat sides, and that by far is the most challenging thing, and learning how to cope with that. To me, there's the challenge of firing people, but it's relatively easy to fire people for performance. It's really hard to fire nice people that you yourself put on the wrong box.
Yeah.
That's infinitely harder, because it has much more to do with your own introspections and challenges than with their work, right? And so you're in some sense punishing yourself, and that's always been a challenge for me. And that also is. Other than unforeseen events like an economic crisis or something, people is really the only lever you control when you build your company, and so the better you get at that, the better and bigger your company will become.
Sure. Yeah, we often mistake it's a brand, it's a product, it's this and that, but it's something else. So this is the surprise question I was going to throw at all of you, which is, given that the next theme of the next forum is women in technology, what are each of you doing proactively to encourage women at, not just women, but diversity in workplace? In specific, are you hiring women? What are you doing different? Are you meeting the bare minimum by law, or are you going over and above? So we will start from, I know your company, Ross, is a fairly small company, but yet I think you have, and even if it's not specific to your company, please express your views on the subject as well.
Yeah, we have basically 8 people, and 2 of them are women. One of the co-owners is a woman. I wasn't involved in her hiring. My president in Asia hired her, but I think it's interesting. Actually, 3 of them are women. One of them is part-time, but in Asia, there's quite a lot of differences for women. In Japan, it's harder to hire women in that sort of management role, but in China, it's actually extremely easy, and in Taiwan as well. We're just getting to the point where we only have 8 people. We only are hiring people that can really contribute and immediately have a strong impact, and so it's harder we're not looking to necessarily train a lot of people, so if there are fewer people in the field that are qualified that are women, then there are going to be fewer people at our company that are women. But we certainly don't have any bias, and we're happy with our female employees.
Very good. I hope you're hugely successful. You have a lot of employees, and
Thank you.
Take that number from 25% or 30% to maybe 50%.
I hope so.
Paul, same question for you.
It's an interesting, challenging question because when you put a rec out for a new engineer, let's say, and there's 25 resumes that come across your desk and there are no women in the mix, it's difficult to hire a woman for the role. At Vuzix, we have a fairly diverse population of folks that work with us, and folks from around the world, quite frankly. There's 2 wonderful schools next door, the University of Rochester and RIT, and it's sad to say, but most of the technical students that are going there are more leaning towards the male side of the population. But at Vuzix, we've got a lot of folks in the finance side. I mean, we're a public company, right? So there's a reasonable portion of people here that are across the board. So we have a nice mix of folks, and we, on the engineering side, are purposely looking for more female folks that we could hire. It makes it even more fun at work to have a nice mix of people. But it's just difficult because there's not as many options. Yeah,
no, completely agreed. This has been an ongoing issue, particularly our industry is pretty horrible from that perspective. Helge?
Well, Shri, I'm an extremist on this topic. So I very, very strongly believe that diverse and heterogeneous teams will beat homogeneous team anytime. There's lots of support for that in studies. So we actually are, my shop is gender balanced through and through at the 50-50 line from all ranks. So my executive team has actually because it's an uneven number, more women than men, and then through all ranks of the organization. And we're an extremely technical outfit, to your point about not finding candidates. The way we do this, one, obviously, by the time you hit a tipping point where, you know, a third or 40, 50% of your executive team is female, my head of engineering is a woman, you know, all the, most of the head of the R&D and so forth are all women. Partly there's a role model effect. If you have an organization that's structured that way, the rest will just flow. So the candidate pool, because the women executives, women leaders are obviously out there, they just may not apply, right? So once, so one is just the role modeling effect. The other thing we do is we're very deliberate about this. We're very deliberate about not making sure that we hire against ratios, because that just is a bad idea in general, but that our recruiting pools, our candidate pools, are balanced. So what I tell my talent organization is that I won't start interviewing for a particular position until you have a roster that is 50-50. I don't care where you drag them up, and I don't care what you have to do. So, you know, very often we are in situations where, thank you. And it works. It works because once you have a balanced roster, balanced hiring decisions kind of happen naturally, right? There will still be some biases here and there. We're all human beings, but the hard part is if you don't give opportunities to your team, to your managers, to your executives. So you have to force the talent organization to just fill the pipe. And you know, they're out there. We have a few hundred people in our kind of extended portfolio. Of course, there are a few hundred capable women on the planet, right? There's, you know, it's just, you know, the macro statistics have no impact whatsoever at the micro level, and we are distinctly micro.
Very good, thank you. I know how Frank feels about this subject because last year when we had a Women in Technology event, he actually flew folks who would normally not go to a technical event just to attend that specific session. So,
yeah, I'm very intrigued how you can get to a 50-50 roster, because my female HR manager is never able to give me that kind of roster. So
the same is true for us.
I'm going to send my female HR manager to be trained by your female HR manager to give us a decent roster, because I keep complaining about this all the time. And we don't get the candidates. The problem starts with education.
I think you have two CEOs who are going to send their HR folks over to you.
The problem starts with education. I do small things, like at the school of my kids, they were trying to raise funding for computer by computer. I just bought them all a computer, and it's anonymous, so my kids won't know, because otherwise maybe it influences them. Right thing to but do. It has to start with education. Education has been underpopulated with female candidates. When I graduated, there was 5% female engineers in my year. So I don't know how we can get to a balanced hiring. It's very, very difficult. And Naila knows that we try, and I complain all the time. Yeah, so you have a magic formula that I want to know about.
This is a tough subject, which is why I brought it up. In the interest of time, what I'm going to do is switch over to take some more questions. That will give Bruce a chance to take the microphone to whoever has got a question. You had a question earlier, right? Yes. They answered the question. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, please go ahead. You can probably just borrow my microphone. Oh, Bruce has got one. Yep.
So this is a very humbling experience to be here to listen to y'all success, ups and downs. So I have a question. There are a lot of discussion on the hiring. So what you as CEO, entrepreneur, investor, what are the key qualities when you try to hire a team, look into investment, and so maybe share with us what are the things you look into the people? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You want to take it, Frank?
Yeah, that's another favorite topic of mine. I hire by attitude, right? And I hire by experience. And skills you can teach, but the right attitude, the ability to do a job, that's what I hire by. So Too many people focus on skills.
Other aspects.
Yeah, but we also, I think what's also important, we have in our budget per employee a few $1,000s in training budget. So employees can go out and say, hey, I want to learn German, or I want to learn Mandarin, or I want to learn about designing, I want to learn about AutoCAD. And we give that freedom. So those skills, you can augment people. The attitude has to be right.
Absolutely.
I would agree with that. At Vuzix, it's the go, no-go thing. I don't care how good you are with everything else. If you can't get along, if it doesn't seem like you're going to fit in with the team, it's instantly a problem for everybody else. And so you might just as well move on up front because it'll never work.
What I'm going to do is, unless there's a pressing question, if you raise your hand, I'll take the question. If not, I'm going to ask a question of the panel. Okay. Looking at the next, 3 years, because with technology, anything more than 3 years is pretty hard to predict. Even 3 years is pretty hard. And this is actually an easy question for Ross. For the rest of you, you don't do this on an everyday basis, just part of your job, whereas it's almost full-time. That's what they do, predicting and forecasting. Where is this industry going? If somebody in the audience wants to look for a job or invest in a company, start their own company, or do whatever it is, where is this industry going? Please keep your responses very short so that we can cover this. Any of you can take, and I'll go to Ross last, because I know this is what he does. You want to start, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it's fairly simple. We think that the world of computing is changing yet again. I mean, it's always constantly changing. And the display component has always been a big piece of that. But the whole idea of the real physical world and the digital world coming together is happening. And it'll take time before everybody's wearing a pair of glasses, but glasses are going to be a part of it. We're sure of that. It's happening in enterprise today. There's ROIs every place you look for people using the glasses. And the way the computing systems have gotten so small and lightweight, and the fact that you can actually wear these devices connected. So from our perspective, I'm not saying that people won't have laptops on their desktops anymore. My mom still uses a phone wired to the wall, but there is a shift coming. Kids love being connected, and the digital and the real world are going to get harder and harder to tell the difference.
Mm-hmm. Helge, same question.
Well, ignoring any one particular technology that may or may not make it, displays are shifting from being a technology asset, a specialized thing, to a ubiquitous commodity. And so with that comes an opportunity for the display industry to embrace that trend. And that's, I actually believe, I don't believe that we hire a lot of women or young people or old people or whatever because of a kind of belief in social good. I do it because I think when you have a ubiquitous commodity, you want everybody from everywhere be part of the process of building this. You want people of different backgrounds, genders, artists, scientists, technologists, engineers, business people. You want all these people to come together because when you have ubiquitous solutions, you need a ubiquitous part of humanity to champion it. And so I think more and more the innovation will move away from the engineers that come to the symposium to the global community shaping how we use displays. Because the display has ceased being a rectangle in a living room and has become a day-to-day commodity that you use for just about everything.
Anything, yeah. Thank you. Frank?
I see a couple of trends. The first trend is that new types of displays are coming. So you should be prepared for that. I call it the end of the dark ages. The whole of SID is indoors. We sit in a dark room with ugly light. And why is that? Because these displays, they're emissive, transmissive, and they don't really work well in daylight. I think we're going to see a world where we don't have to be in the dark anymore to enjoy a display. And that's something I hope to contribute to. The second thing that's extremely important, and I learned that from Ross Young. Last year, 88% of the money that went into displays came from Chinese-related sources. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. So if you don't know the company Transsion, if you don't know the company Oppo, if you don't know the company Vivo, if you don't know the company Xiaomi, if you don't know Huami, then you need to maybe start looking at hiring executives that actually know these companies. Because I meet a lot of companies where they tell me they're display experts and they have never heard of these companies, which is unbelievable if 88% of the money invested comes from China. So
Well, not just that. These companies you just listed are number one in their different categories.
they're number one. Transsion is number one smartphone company in Africa. And I can almost never meet anyone who knows Transsion. It's an amazing company. They outperform Apple and Samsung in Africa. And that's important because that's probably the fastest growing market in the world, right? So, final message. You asked about jobs. If you are young, go back, pack up, go and live a few years in China, because the future is being cooked up in China, in my view.
Thank you. And you've had many years of experience running companies there, and it's a lot of great experience in China. Ross, same question. You do this for a living.
I'm gonna.
Do we have to pay for this now?
No.
Yes, yes.
It's my gift to you. I'm going to correct Frank first. It's now gone from 88 to 90%, and it's actually for this year, not last year. But just on that point, I think all of the mainstream commodity panels are going to be made in China. The Korean manufacturers and the Taiwan manufacturers are going to innovate or die. If they can't innovate and make highly differentiated panels, they're going to go out of business. And I think we're going to see over the next 3 years a lot of fab closures, more fab closures in Korea, more fab closures in Taiwan, more pivoting into OLEDs, more pivoting into micro LEDs, because the Chinese have bought their way into the display industry. They've lowered their costs dramatically through these subsidies. The purpose of these subsidies is to move jobs from Korea and Taiwan to China, and they're going to succeed.
Yeah, and I just gave the Best in Show awards for the large category, both with Chinese companies, Visionox and BOE. I think I don't think it's ever happened in the history of SID, but you're absolutely right, there is this trend. Why don't we take at least one more question? We're slightly out of time, but I would still like to, if there's a question in the back. I'm glad there's a question in the back, otherwise I thought we'll jump up and down again.
I'd just like to ask if there's any advice for generating early stage capital in the startup.
Helge, you want to take that?
Sure. You mean generating or raising? Raising, okay. It's generating, you have to talk to the guys who make revenue. So if you're building a display-related business and it's a pure hardware business, which a lot of the display-related companies tend to be these days still, you definitely have an uphill struggle in the traditional venture capital community. The VC community is still very much enamored with e-commerce, marketplace, web plays. Those who style themselves as more technology investors are going to think of technologies as machine learning, deep learning, other kind of software plays. Hardware investment is still very hard to do. What that means is that it raises the bar for showing traction. One of the things that I think most hardware companies that I meet do wrong when it comes to capital raising is failing to understand that venture capital is not about assessing absolute progress, it is about assessing rate of progress. It's not where you are on the graph, it's the slope that led you there. And that's where hardware startups often have a really difficult time, because they sit down and they go, okay, in my first year I built this prototype, and now I'm going to take 3 more years to make this prototype twice as good, right? And that feels gratifying, and you've made progress and you've done something. But from a fundraising perspective, you would have been much better off talking to the VC industry with your crappy prototype in year 1, because they would draw dots through that and say, okay, in 1 year they're able to get to this one. And then they project forward that, well, that means in 2 years they can get to this much higher thing. Whether you can or not, that's a different question, but by that point you have the money in the bank. So if you're building a hardware company, I really encourage you, start putting fundraising strategy front and center. In our portfolio, for example, 20 plus companies, a bunch of them are pure hardware. If we have a company that hasn't raised a new round in an 18 months window, we get very, very antsy. And it's not because they hit or have not hit some particular milestone, it's because we're running out of clock. the slope inevitably goes down, and it gets harder and harder to pull off the sort of technological miracle to get you back up again. So try to think about getting, whatever you have in like a 6 to 12 months time frame, and seeing if you can raise on the strength of that. And that will also fit you much closer into the traditional non-hardware VCs kind of mental model. And that's pretty much what you need to do, because there aren't a lot of hardware VCs out there.
Thank you so much.
Yesterday we had the investor conference, and we had some strategic VCs, and their advice would be to not go directly to the conventional VCs, but because they don't know anything about the display industry, right? And the strategic VCs do, and their interests may overlap with what you're doing. They would like to see you early, and the way to approach them would be 5 to 15 slide presentation, not 50 to 100 slides. And they've done funding. These are companies like Intel Capital, Applied Ventures, Merck Ventures, seed capital of like 200,000 or even less. So, try to reach out to the strategic VCs early, I think, is another option.
Thank you so much.
There's a tough road ahead, and it's related to that 90% number. If 90% of the money that goes into the industry comes from China, as a hardware startup in the US, it's almost impossible. Consider packing up and go to where the money is. Early stage investments, people don't like to do them long distance. Early stage investments, people like to do them in a radius where they can drive to the entrepreneur and check on what's being done with the money. Given the fact that all the money is in China, the industry is in China, and early stage investments are closed door, if you are early stage, you should consider going to China and do it there. That's what I would do today.
It's very good advice. It's so true. I know when you put a panel like this together and get these 4 CEOs to show up, they all have a lot going on, and Frank alluded to the fact that he's probably got another 10 more meetings to get done today. So I'm going to close the forum. Let's give a big hand to our panelists. And I have a request for all of you. Following this, in about 15 minutes or so, maybe 20 minutes, we will have the Women in Technology Forum right here in the same room. If you can, please stick around, and that'll be wonderful. Thank you so much.